So the bloodshed that I was referring to, it's what has happened and what is happening currently and what might also happen in the future. By that time, I did not know that the incident of the 16th will happen. But I did, and I emphasize this part, General, but I did also see that if the dispersal has to take place, there might be shooting taking place either from the police or either from the protesters and also from the police. Now, General,
Olohlobo uGeneral xa ebuzwa ngumhlekazi uNgalwana okokuba wayesho ngantoni lento okokuba akafuni kubekho uphalalo legazi phaya njengoba ichaza nje ukuthi wabona ukuba xa kuzawuhlukaniswa aba bantu kungahle kube khona ukudutshulana okuvela kwaba baqhankqalazi kanene kumapolisa.
General, my question on that is this. Surely, General, the part from this excerpt that says, open quote, but I did also see that if the dispersal has to take place, there might be shooting taking place either from the police or either from the protesters and also from the police, must mean, close quote, must mean that as a matter of fact, you General, saw the possibility of shooting either by the police or protesters or both if a dispersal took place.
Ukusho kokuba ke General lento ithetha ukuba wawunawo umbono okokuba xa ningenza inzame zokubahlukanisa aba bantu kungahle kube khona ingxabano apha kube khona ukudubula okuvela emapoliseni ikanene okuvela kwabo baqhankqalazi.
Do you agree that that is what this means?
Le ntetho efundwa apha ichaza loo nto.
Correct, Chairperson, referring to the fact that the protest, there were firearms of the police that were taken and that of the security companies.
Ewe ndithetha lento ngoba kwakuthethwe imipu kumapolisa nakwi-security.
Needless to say, General, if you foresaw the possibility of shooting, you must likewise have foreseen the possibility of injury or even death and thus bloodshed, not so?
Into ethetha okokuba ke xa uyoba nengcingo enjengezokuba ngaba khona ukudutshulana uyakufikelela nengcingo ngaba khona ukuphalala kobomi apho nokonzakala kwabantu.
It is not correct, Chairperson. I did also indicate the measures that we did put in place and also the actions that we have done in relation to those individuals that might be carrying the firearms illegally.
Bendixelela iCommission okokuba yintoni esayenza inzame zokokuba ukuthintela ukuba yenzeke loo nto.
General, don't follow that. This is a question that flows from the answer that you have just given relative to what the excerpt that I read to you means. You agree that what you say there means that you saw, because you say, I see, I also see. You saw that, let me just look at this again. I did also see that if the dispersal has to take place, there might be shooting taking place either from the police or, and then you go, or the protesters and so on and so on. You are saying this is something that you saw as a possibility and you've already agreed, not so?
Andituvumile General okokuba uthe wayibona lento ukuba ngabakho ngahle kwenzeka okokuba kubekho ukudutshulana xa ningazama ukubahlukanisa aba bantu okungavela emapoliseni nakubo aba bantu. Andithi utsho kanjalo.
Chairperson, seeing I was referring to the individuals on the side of the protesters that might have been carrying the firearms, and I did indicate how that risk, which I said I foresee, how it has been mitigated by the plan.
Xa ndithi ndabona bendibona bendisho kokuba ndikokela aba bantu bephethe impu yamapolisa ukuba ngabo abangahle badubule sabe sesenza ke inzame zokuthi ithintele kuba ingenzeki into enjengaleyo.
General, mitigated but not excluded, not so? Mitigated but not completely excluded.
nenza inzame ke general kuba ingenzeki lonto kodwa ke akusho kuba beyingeke yenzeke.
Chairperson, definitely excluded in the manner that bloodshed happened there, because that is not what one was referring to. Yes, somebody shooting at the police, yes, but that the protesters in that great number, while the barbed wire, or to say the plan being interrupted, I did not foresee that.
Uthi uzenra ibonanga into kokuba aba baqhankqalazi bazawuphazamisa bazozama ukuphuma phakathi kolucingo oluhlabayo bekuyinto ebengagcina uba ingenzeka le.
General, you now seem to be dealing with what in fact happened, the breaching of the police line and so on. That is not what I'm asking you. I'm asking about what you yourself are saying in this excerpt, and you've already agreed with my interpretation of that excerpt. And you agree that what it means is that what you saw, you yourself as a matter of fact saw, was the possibility of shooting by the protesters and the possibility of shooting back by the police. You've agreed with that, haven't you?
Andithi uvumelene nento general yokokuba wawuna umbono okokuba kungenzeka ukuba xa sibahlukanisa ababantu kungabakho ukudubulana phakathi kwamapolisa ikanene bona abaqhankqalazi abaphethe impo badubula amapolisa. Ngoku uthetha ngento eyenzeka ke le yokufohla ucingo olulamapolisa. Akuwo mbuzo ke lowo.
All I'm asking you now is just to establish, have you agreed with that interpretation? You have, haven't you?
Ibuza ngokuba xa ndikubuza lento okokuba uvumelana nami ukuba lento ibhale apho ithetha lonto na.
Chairperson, I did say that there were protesters that they had firearms that could shoot at the police, and the police could shoot in retaliation, but not the bloodshed as it has happened at Marikana.
Hlekazi ndithe mna kwakukho abaqhankqalazi babephethe impu ababangahle badubule kumapolisa namapolisa adubuleke eziphindisela kodwa ke bendingathethi mna ngoluphalalo lwegazi olwenzeka eMarikana.
Yes, General, it's quite plain you are agreeing with me. And just so we are exactly on the same page, I too am not asking you about how the bloodshed that we eventually saw came about. I'm not asking you about that. I'm exactly saying what you are saying, and we seem to be in agreement on that. Now, and in fact, elsewhere in the transcript, and you'll say so if I'm wrong, elsewhere in the transcript, you say that you knew about that because some media people had told you that some of the protesters were hiding firearms beneath their blankets. Am I correct on that as well?
Right, nalapho ke General xa ndithi wasawufumene nengxelo yayivela kwabanye bentathelo kokuba kukho abaqhankqalazi abafihle imipu phantsi kwezingubo ezebazinxibileyo.
Correct, Chairperson.
Ewe kunjalo mhlawumbe.
And in fact, you also knew, as a matter of fact, that some of the protesters had stolen firearms from the police and also from Lonmin security officers.
Nolwazi ke wawunalo kokuba kukho impu ebiwe emapoliseni nakwi-security zakwa-Lonmin.
Correct, Chairperson.
Kunjalo.
Now surely, if as you say, the protesters might have fired shots at the police, they could not possibly have been doing that for fun. They would have been firing directly at the police, not just firing anywhere. That is what you foresaw, not so? That the shots would be aimed at the police, is that not so?
Into wayibona inokwenzeka ke general ukuba aba bantu abanawudlala nje bazawujongisa lempe emapoliseni badubule amapolisa kungadlalwa apho bonzakala.
Yes, Chairperson, and I did also explain how the plan addressed that risk.
Nditshilo kokuba sayenza nzame ezinjani kokuba ingenzeki lonto.
Addressed as it might have been, but you still also foresaw the possibility that the police might shoot back. You say so, not so?
Nditshilo kokuba xa abantu babephethe imipu bangahle badubule emapoliseni woyika okokuba namapolisa azawuphindisela ngokudubula kunjalo.
Chairperson, I said if the police they see they are being shot at, they will act in self or private defense.
Mna xa amapolisa abona uba ayadutshula azawuphindisela nawo ekuzameni ukuzikhusela nokukhusela abanye oogxa.
And that is exactly what you say in this excerpt you foresaw, not so?
Andithi le ntetho uyithethayo ke kule nto ibhalwe phaya.
Not correct, Chairperson. But what I'm saying is that it's exactly what I've already explained, and also the mitigation of the plan, because as a police service, we have to protect the life of the people.
Le nto endiyithethayo yile endiyichazayo mhlekazi okokuba senza yonke inzame ukuba zingenzeki ezinto ngoba omnye umsebenzi wamapolisa kokuba sikhusele ubomi babantu babahlali.
And the reasons, as I've explained in my supplementary statement, why we have to disperse, they were very clear, Chairperson.
Nezizathu endiye ndazibeka ke kwesi statement sami sesibini esasibangela okokuba sibohlukanise.
General, if you disagree with me on my last question, I want to understand you then. On what basis are you saying that the shooting by the police that you are referring to in this excerpt was not the shooting in response to the shooting by the protesters who, as you say, had firearms? How do you say that shooting by the police was not the same shooting that you are referring to in this excerpt?
Xa uyikhanyela le nto ndiyibeka kuwe ke general uyichaza kanjani le nto yokokuba uthi wena wacinga okokuba amapolisa azawuphindisela adubule xa kungadubula abaqhankqalazi xa ungavumelani nami ngoba nami yinto endiyithethayo leyo?
Chairperson, my explanation was very clear to say amongst the protesters there should have been somebody who's having a firearm. And surely we had, and General Edendale has already testified that we had the observers that were looking, those that might produce a firearm amongst the protesters.
Usexelde uGeneral Anandelo kokuba sasibajongile aba bantu babephethele babangaba ngabo abaphethe imbulethethe emapoliseni.
And Chairperson, it might already been said in the commission either by General Edendale that we also had the counter snipers and those that will have the binoculars to look at those that will have the firearm. That is the shooting that I was speaking to.
Okudubula benthetha ngako ke mina njengoba achazile uAnandelo kokuba sasi nawo amapolisa lawa zi-counter snipers abekhona apha phakathi kwethu kukhona aba baphethe i-binoculars bakwazi ukujonga ukuba ngobani aba phakathi kwaba baqhankqalazi abaphethe le mipu.
Chairperson, in answer to Advocate Matlanga, it will be saying if either of those people are not seen by the police, and surely if they attack the police, that is what we are speaking, but the risk to address is the one that I'm talking about, but not that shooting which took place at Marikana. That one I was not referring to.
Sasenze inzame ezinjengezo ukuba babonakale aba bantu phambi kokuba badubule kodwa ke ndithi okokudubula bakungahle kwenzeka xa bengababonanga amapolisa.
Does it really matter? The shooting that took place in Marikana was, as it's being described to us, as we've seen. But the answer to the question that's been put to you is that there was a distinct possibility that shooting of another kind would take place, as a result of which people would be killed. Isn't that right? Blood was going to be shed.
Jula kwasemarikana siyasakubona apha mfanele ukwenzeka kanjani kodwa ke uthela apho kuba bekungahle kube khona okunye ukudujula ukudubulana okungahle bube khona okungavelanga apha njengoba echaza nje umhlekazi uMadlanga.
Yes, Chairperson, but the plan, the mitigation of the plan was actually addressing precisely that risk.
Kunjalo mhlekazi kodwa ke sasenze inzame zokuba ingenzeki lonto njengoba senichazile ukuba inzame ntoni esasizenzile.
The commission will recall how we put the 6 nyalas and what I've already explained now.
I-commission ivile ubungqina bokuba inyala ezintandathu sasizimise apho sasizimise ngandlela enjani sizimisele ntoni.
General, I will repeat and say that not that I'm detracting from what the chairperson said, but just to try to avoid what seems to be some confusion in your mind, I too was purely at the level of what you yourself are saying in the excerpt that I read to you, which I read to say, and you have agreed. You yourself saw the possibility of the protesters who elsewhere in the transcript you say, and you have agreed again, were hiding firearms beneath their blankets. You foresaw the possibility of them firing at the police, as also you foresaw the possibility of police firing back, and you add that, but that was in self-defense. But what I'm trying to emphasize is that you do agree that that is exactly what you say in this excerpt means, and my understanding is that you have agreed with that. Am I correct in that understanding?
Right, General Kandibeka ngolo hlobo kokuba mina nawe siyavumelana kuba intetho ethethayo yiyo le endiyibeka kuwo kokuba nobenilolwazi lokuba kukho abantu abafihle imibhubhu apha phantsi kwezingubo abanxibileyo. Xa abo bantu bangahle bakhuphe le mibhubhu badubule emapoliseni bekuzoba khona ukudutshulana ukuphindiselwa kwamapolisa njengoba uyibeka nawe nami nditsho ngolo hlobo.
Regardless of the stage when this might have been, whether it was a preaching or even before the preaching or at what you foresaw, I do not know at what stage you foresaw it. You foresaw the possibility of the protesters shooting at the police and the police shooting back in self-defense. You've accepted that. Am I correct or not?
The right kantsho njalo kuba yenzeka lento noma ngeliphi ixesha phambi kokuba nendlala ucingo noma ningakulendlala ucingo kodwa bekuyoba khona uyicingile ukuba into enjengaleyo ingahle ibe khona yenzeke.
Chairperson, I said that risk for the reasons that I have explained. Yes, one foresaw it, but there were mitigations to address the risk.
Ndichilo
There
kuba
were
kwakhona
actions that addressed that risk.
ubungozi obunjengobo babungahle benzeke kodwa ke sathatha
I don't think mitigations is the right word, but we won't debate that at the moment. But what is clear, I think, is that whatever was done to try to minimize the situation, you did foresee bloodshed, people being killed. Isn't that right?
into
As a distinct possibility of the action that was going to be taken. Isn't that right?
kule meko yayikhona apho abanye
These
bephethe
people,
impunga.
according to the evidence that we have had, suggestion is that they had taken, that the muti had been administered to them. They believed they were invincible, invulnerable. So they weren't scared of being shot at by the police. If that evidence is correct, obviously you'll have to decide that later. But if that was so, they had weapons themselves, didn't think they could be hurt by the police weapons. So, and you knew about the muti, didn't you?
Buyazi indaba yokuba aba bantu baye bafeshwa ngamayeza phaya.
Correct, Chairperson, I knew about the motive, but I did not believe in what they are believing in.
Ndayiva indaba yeyeza kodwa ke ndingayikholelwa okokuba into enokwenzeka leyo.
Now, I accept you did not believe that they would be invincible or invulnerable.
Hayi ndiyayiva.
You realize, that's the whole point. You
Ubungayikholelwa into
realize
yokuba bangeke babonakale noma banokoyiseka.
you realize they may have proceeded under a false impression that they were invincible. You knew they weren't. And you knew if the police fired at them, there might well be fatal consequences, isn't it, sir?
Ndithi ke wena njengokuba ungumuntu ongayikholela into yokuba bebangenawubonakala bona beyikholela leyo nto uyazi okokuba amapolisa xa beyadubula bebazokwenzakala.
Chairperson, as I indicated, I was looking at the individuals, and that is really what I'm, not the mess at it has happened at Marikana. About that risk and that, and according to my statement there.
Ngokuya kwestatement sami ke noma ndandinembono onjengalo kodwa ke andicinganga uba yokwenzeka lento njengoba yenzeka phaya eMarikana.
That answer mean that you didn't foresee that 34 people would be killed and about 70, I think is the number of people would be injured. You didn't foresee that.
Uthi ngamanye amazwi awuzange ube
You didn't
nombono.
foresee bloodshed on that scale.
Ngucinge ukuba kuyawusweleka abantu abaninzi ngolu hlobo bade bafike phaya ko-34 abantu abaswelekileyo. Yayizange ifike encingweni zakho loo.
Is that right?
Kunjalo General?
Correct, Chairperson.
Ewe kunjalo.
But the statement that's been put to you, what does it mean in the context of the foreseeability of bloodshed, at least affecting some people?
Incazelo yakho ithini ke apho uthi khona waba nombono ukuba kungahle kubekho uphalalo legazi apho? Chaza ntoni ke lona?
The last statement, correct, Chairperson, and hence the plan had to address that risk. I won't talk about mitigation, but what the plan actually addresses that risk.
Kodwa ke njengoba nisishilo ukuba elicebo elenziwa licebo lalenza okokuba ide
One of my commissioners has asked me to take an adjournment for 5 minutes, which I'm prepared to do. So we will adjourn now for 5 minutes.
Thathe imizuzu emihlanu njena.
following day, but what I was referring to, and what that maybe is what I wanted, that's why I was saying there, quote, tomorrow or tonight, and people are dying, close quote, and the end of what you say there. But you do accept that you were referring to the following day, but just that you were not referring only to the following day.
Wawuthetha ke ngento ocinga uba ingahle yenzeke ngemini elandelayo kodwa ke wathi awuthethi ngale mini elandelayo kuphela nakwezinye imini ezawuza emva koko.
Now, General, do you accept that this last expert puts it beyond question that what you yourself understood was that police blood or the striker's blood might be shared? That is what you yourself said or saw or understood.
Tetho evela kuwe ke leyo general uba waba nayo imbono ukuba kungahle kubekho uphalalo legazi pha. Akumapoliseni ikanene kubo abaqhankqalazi.
Chairperson, it is also clear that I was not only saying tomorrow, but what I was saying, still referring to the individual, not in the large scale as Marikana.
Ndingathethi ngemini elandelayo kuphela kodwa ndithetha ngaba bantu ndandithetha ngabo ndingatsho ubuninzi obu baseMarikana.
And I was also referring to what has happened since Sunday, and even some of the people that died as a result where firearms were used.
Ndandithetha ke ngento eyayisenzeke kusuka ngemini yecawe apho abantu baye bonzakala khona kwathathwa nemipu nezinto ezinjengezo.
General, let's just clear this up. At the time you were holding the debriefing session with NUM, and you were addressing the question, you did not know that the dispersal action would take place the following day, that is on the 16th. Am I correct?
Nyanso kokuba ngeli xesha uthetha nabenum ubungekabi nolwazi lokokuba uyiza kwenzeka lento ngemini elandelayo kokuba kube khona olu.
Correct, Chairperson.
Kunjalo.
It is understandable, therefore, that you could indeed, as you say, not have been referring to the following day, but what you definitely were referring to was if a dispersal action were to take place, and you've already said yes to that in response to a question by Commissioner Hemraj. Now, let me take you to page 11397 of the transcript, lines 5 to 23.
Ucacile kokuba ungathethi ngale mini elandelayo kodwa masize kule page lilandelayo endithi masiyifunde.
And this is an examination in chief by Mr. Ngalwana.
Apho wawubuzwa khona ngumhlekazi uNgalwana.
And this is what you say at the evening meeting. Oh, no, that's him. That's my learned friend, Mr. Ngalwana. I'm correct because it's members, so it must be Fiane there. At the evening meeting, the debriefing meeting on the 15th, you said to the trade union leaders that if the police were to implement a dispersal action, there will be bloodshed. Did you convey that same sentiment at the JOC? Your response? Chairperson, no. Mr. Ngalwana, why didn't you? Your response? Chairperson, that was a strategy intended for the union leaders to take the matter seriously when they communicate to their members to lay down their weapons. I did not believe that will happen. Mr. Ngalwana, when you say you did not believe that would happen, what do you mean? What is it that you did not believe will happen, General? Major General Mpembe, I did not believe that when the police go there will be bloodshed. But that's what I'm saying, is that it was a strategy intended to convince the union leaders to take the matter seriously when they communicate with the members.
Phaya nge-15 xa uba nemhlangano kusihla nabe-union wathi kubo ubona okokuba xa amapolisa kuzawunyanzela okokuba ayosasaza aba bantu kungabakho uphalalo legazi ubuzwa ngumhlekazi ongalwana wathi kuye hayi bendiyithetha nje loo nto kubo aba beunion ndifuna okokuba bayithathele phezulu le nto xa beyothetha nabalandeli babo wathi xa ebuzwa okokuba ungayithetha kanjani into enjengalo wathi wena awuboni awuzange ube khona imbono okokuba luzawuba khona nyani uphalalo legazi.
Now, General, I read this to suggest that you are now saying that you did not foresee the risk of shooting and therefore bloodshed, and that you had merely said what you said at the debriefing session as a matter of strategy. So no foresight of bloodshed.
Andibuva kakuhleke ngoku general uthi wena yayingekho embonweni wakho lento okokuba ngahle kube khona uphalalo legazi wathetha nje okokuba ngahle kube khona uphalalo legazi ukuze aba wawuthetha nabo bayithathele ingcalelo lento wawuyithetha nabo.
Am I correct in that interpretation?
Kunjalo general?
Correct, Chairperson. Chairperson, I also want to indicate, to say,
mandongeza ngokuthi
there is also a point where I indicated that the most preferred resolving of the matter, it was the handing over of the weapons.
Hence, dayisho lento kokuba indlela engcono ukuba kugcitshwe lento kokuba kunikezwe izigalo ezibabeziphethe izikhobe ezibabeziphethe abaqangqala.
Hence, I indicated that it was a strategy, that they should take the matter seriously, that we should not even go to a phase of dispersal.
Ndandibeka ngolhlobo ke ukuze aba bamele imibutho bayithathele ingqalelo lento xa beyothetha nabantu babo kungaze kubekho isidingo sokuba kungene kolunyathelo lokuba bayosasazwa.
But Chairperson, I still have indicated that there were protesters that had firearms, and as he has already been mentioned, and the risk to the plan to address that risk was also in place.
Kodwa ke njengoba senishilo umhlekazi okokuba sasinalo ulwazi okokuba kukho abaqhankqalazi abaphethe izixhobo phaya sekwenziwe nokwicebo lokokuba iyawusetshenzwa ngendlela enjani loo nto.
General, you've said quite a lot, and the greater part of it I find quite confusing, at least to me. Now, what I want to focus on is the part that I understood.
Ndithi ke ndizawubuza ngale ndiva ngayo general ngoba enye intetho yakho nyani andiyivisisi kakuhle ndawubuza ngale ndiva.
And the part that I understood is that you actually agree with my interpretation of the last excerpt that I have read, and your agreement is that what you mean there is that you in fact did not have foresight of the risk of shooting by the protesters and the possibility of the police shooting back in self-defense, and therefore, as a result, the possibility of bloodshed. I understand you to be accepting that part.
Ibona okokuba uyayamkela ke intetho okokuba incazelo yami ithi sithi wena uthi hayi nyani kwangewona umbono wakho okokuba ngahle kubekho uphalalo legazi apho okokuba kungahle kube khona ukonzakala kwabantu.
And that instead you had said what you had said about the shooting and counter-shooting and the risk of bloodshed purely as a matter of strategy to convince the UNUM leaders to talk to their members and convince them to disarm. Purely matter of strategy, but as a matter of fact, you did not have foresight of the risk of bloodshed.
Vakakuthe general okokuba yayingekho lento embonweni zakho kokuba kuyobakho uphalalo legazi wayithetha loo nto kwaba benum usenzela nje okokuba le nto mabayithathele ngalelo gqitha xa beyothetha nabantu babo ukuze bakwazi ukuthi babeke phansi izixhobo ezebaziphethe.
I'm repeating the question because, as I said, I got confused by the long answer you gave. I'm trying to establish if you agree with that part, just that part. Am I interpreting what you are saying correctly?
Incazelo ndikunikeza yona ndichaza kakuhle nje ngoba usitsho ngaphandle kwale ntetho yakho eyabayinde.
Chairperson, the context of what I was saying here, and I think that is what is more important, in the sense that what I said to Mr. Zenzeni Zokwana, Mr. Ngalwana wanted to know if I believed in it so, why then I did not brief the police officers in the joke. And that's the context that I was saying. But it does not take away the issue of me raising the consent of the protesters having firearms. The plan that had to be specific in terms of addressing that risk.
Mandi ibeke ngolhlobo umhlekazi kokuba into ebaleka egcitha apha kokuba intoni la ndayithetha ngolohlobo kusenzeni Zokwana ndisenzele okokuba makayithathe thathele phezulu lento xa eyothetha nabantu bakhe okokuba kude kungenzeki lento.
General, in exactly that context, the context that you give, exactly that context, what I'm trying to establish is whether you agree with me that what this means. In that context, what this means is that you are saying you in fact did not foresee the risk of shooting by the protesters and counter-shooting by the police, and therefore the possibility of bloodshed if a dispersal were to take place. That is what you are saying. You only did this as a matter of strategy. Am I correct or not?
Right apho General xa ndithi nyaniso okokuba wawungabona ubungozi wena bokuba kungahle kube khona ungquzulwana phakathi kwamapolisa nabaqhankqalazi badubulane kodwa wayithetha lento uyibeka aba ukuze bayithathele phezulu lento bathathe ingqalelo.
Chairperson, the strategy is very specific here. Is to say, let your members disarm voluntarily. And that is purely the context which I'm referring to.
Icebo lalelinye nje mhlakazi ndandibeka lento ukuze akwazi ukuxela aba bantu bakho ukuba babeke phansi isixhobo.
And there is a separation between a strategy and a risk.
Xa kusetshenziswa icebo elinjengaleli ke icebo nobungozi izinto ezimbini ezohlukile.
General, did you or did you not foresee that if there was dispersal action, that there would be shooting between the parties and bloodshed? Did you or did you not foresee that?
Mbuzo ovela kuMhamraj uthi General kasixelele wawuyibona into kokuba xa kungaba khona inyanzelo ukuba aba bantu bayohlukaniswa phaya awuzange ube nengcinga ukuba kuzokuba khona ungquzulwana ukudutshulana phakathi kwabo namapolisa wayibona ngolo hlobo kanene boyibona ngento enokwenzeka le.
Chairperson, my answer is clear, is to say individually yes, and to disarm them, it was a best strategy to let their own leaders persuade their members and hand those weapons voluntarily.
Aba bantu nithethe ngabo ke kwakukhona into yokuba bangahle badubule emapoliseni kodwa ke indlela engcono yayo yokuthi kwakudinga kokuba aba inkokheli zabo kube zizo ezenza ukuba babeke phansi izixhobo.
I'm afraid I don't understand that. Did you or did you not? Sorry. I'm afraid I don't understand that. Did you or did you not foresee that in the event of a dispersal, there would be shooting between the parties?
Azange icinge General lonto ba xa beyohlukaniswa kuzawuba khona ingquzulwana phakathi kwabo namapolisa.
Chairperson, as I said, individually yes.
So you will have individuals being killed.
Wawubona kuba kuzobakho abantu abathiza abangade babulawe basweleke
Or injured. Individuals would be killed or injured if you tried to disperse the parties. Is that what you say? Individuals who, according to your information, who believed they were invincible, who attempts being made to disperse them. You foresaw they'd resist, did you not? The individuals would. Individuals would.
abantu abathize
Chairperson, the individual that I'm speaking about, those that would be having the firearms,
aba bantu ndithetha ngabo
but
mhlekazi
not those
abaphethe
that
impu
will be invincible. But I'm
They're invincible.
aba bantu benawubonakala.
What would happen to these individuals then? You go along and you try to disperse them. Some of them have got firearms, some of them have got axes, some of them have got assegais, some of them have got pangas. You try to disperse them, you point firearms at them, presumably to try to frighten them. On the basis of what you believed, they thought that they were invincible because of the muti, because you knew about the muti, is that right?
Andisibo sazi ke indaba yeyeza bakhona iyeza esetshenziswayo.
Chairperson, I knew about Umuti.
Yeah. You knew it wouldn't work, but you thought, you believed that they thought it would work. Is that right?
Wazi bacinga ukuba liyawusebenza liyeza.
Correct, Chairperson.
Right. So you come along with one of your men comes along with his R5 or his R1, and he says to this man, "Give me your firearm or give me your panga."
Namba ke besiza aba bakho amapolisa.
And disperse.
Babolatha ngemiba.
Does he listen?
Bekaniphansi isiqhoko.
Does he respond to the demand or command that he disperse or that he hand over his firearm?
Bazawumamela abantu bazawubeka phansi isiqhoko bamamele lento umelo ovela emapoliseni.
As you foresaw what would happen.
Njengendlela wayibona ngayo wena.
Chairperson, the manner in which I foresaw it was that the placing of the barbed wire was precisely to prevent those that have got pangas and spears to be on
the police side of the line.
Yes.
Yeah, but you then got
that will mitigate. I'm sorry, Chairperson.
Sorry. No, I'm interrupting you. You carry on. Sorry.
That would mitigate. As I'm saying, I don't know whether I'm using the right word of mitigating. That will
prevent or minimize is probably the right word. Never mind. Go on.
And those that they had firearms, that's the individual which I'm referring to. Those that have been put, by the way, in the nyalas, on top of the nyalas, with the binoculars and the counter snipers, they will actually only deal with those that will cause the risk. That's the one that I'm referring to. And then when the dispersal process take place, obviously the majority I did expect that they will leave the place, and those that shall have accepted the warnings will lay down their weapons. And Chairperson will recall I did refer to the group between 10 and 20 that could be confronted by the police and encircling them and disarming them. That's how the plan will.
What it means is you put the barbed wire barrier up. You've got to leave a space to go so you can go inside to disarm the people, don't you?
Correct.
Kanindlala olicingo bekukho isikhewu esasikhona apho nanizawuphuma khona xa niyobathathela izixhobo.
So some police have to advance through the gap in the fence, the barbed wire, towards the strikers to make sure they either put their arms down or their arms are taken away from them. Is that right?
Kunjalo kokuba bekuzawubakho indawo evulekile apho isikhewu apho abezophuma khona amapolisa xa eya apha kubakhankalazi ukuba bekani phansi ezixhobo bazithathe. Kunjalo?
Is that right? You can't disarm them by remote control, can you? Isn't there a remote that you can use to get them to put down their arms? Haven't you got to go in and fetch the arms?
Andithi bekufanele kokuba kube
If they don't voluntarily put them down?
azithathe ezixhobo.
Correct, Chairperson.
Ewe kunjalo mtheka.
So you go inside, armed presumably. The police are armed with R1s or R5s, I take it, when they go in to disarm these people. Is that right?
ndithi amapolisa lawo bezawuya phaya kubo bephethe izixhobo i-R5 ne-R1s kunjalo.
Chairperson recalled that those had R1s and R5s. According to the plan, they were supposed to be 100 meters away from the POP members, and they will only come to the fore if the lives of the POP members was in danger.
Well, that's the next question. If a POP man with his tear gas, with his shotgun with a tear gas canister or whatever it is, or stun grenade, if he proceeds into the area through the barbed wire to disarm someone who doesn't want to be disarmed, then what's going to happen?
Bekuyokwenzeka ntoni ke General?
Won't the life of the POP person be endangered?
Bengeke ubeke impilo yabo esichengeni ababe POP abaphethe imipu ishotgun ezezidubula nge gas xa bengena phaya besiya kwaba bantu abaqhome ngolhlobo amapolisa lawa aphethe imbumbulo ale emva kwabo bungabeki impilo yabo esichengeni.
Correct, Chairperson. Chairperson will recall that in the plan, we said that the nyalas will always be next to the POP members that the chairperson is referring to as a safe house.
Sithe inyala ezi sizawuba kufuphi nalamapolisa ePOP ukuze bakwazi ukukhusela apha kuzo xa kukho ubungozi.
We're not talking about something else. We're talking about the POP members are now advancing into the area where the strikers are to disarm them.
General City.
This is what we're debating at the moment.
Amapolisa lawo POP aya kubaqhankqalaza ayothatha izixhobo.
The Inyalas can't follow them into the area to provide a place for them to jump into, a safe place for them to jump into if there's aggression or attack of some kind from the strikers.
Isn't that right?
Well, that's why I understand it, but if I'm misunderstanding it, you must help me.
Chairperson will recall when we said that when Advocate Madlanga asked me that why didn't we pre-position the nyalas for the informal settlement. I said that the resources that we had, and those are the nyalas that I'm referring to, those could have been used as a safe house. We'll follow these members. We'll follow the ones that could enter there, who are moving in groups, confront them and circle and confront them in terms of disarming them.
Inyalas can't go through the barbed wire, and presumably the gap in the barbed wire through which the POP members were going to go to disarm the strikers, that wasn't wide enough for an Inyala, was it? Was it envisaged that Inyalas would go on the other side of the barbed wire?
Inyala ezandithi zazimiswe ngendlela yokuba zazingakwazi ukuba ziphume apha kucingo olu. Kwakuzawuvuleka nje isikhawu sokuba kukwazi ukuphuma ipolisa apho elikwazi ukuyothatha izixhobo kwaba bantu. Inyala yona ngokwayo beyingeke ikwazi ukugqitha apho kunjani?
Chairperson, the nyala is used when we disperse, and probably I understand what the chairperson is saying, that in whatever the picture that is there, chairperson did not see where the space the nyalas could go. But the plan does address the risk that chairperson is talking about, nyalas to be used as a safe house for the POP members.
But did the plan, sorry Mr. Interpreter.
Icebo uthi njengoba lalibhaliwe bonakala iphaya inyala ezizawulandela amapolisa lawo ePOP azokwazi ukuthi xa kukho ubungozi bangene apha kuzo bakhuseleke.
Did the plan provide for the Inyalas or an Inyala to go on the other side of the barbed wire?
Kwakukho icebo lalibhaliwe apho inyala noma inyala ezazizawugqitha zigqithe phaya kolucingo ziye kubaqhankqalazi.
Chairperson, surely when you have to pursue...
Answer is, simple question.
Okay.
Did the plan provide for an Inyala or some Inyalas to go beyond the barbed wire onto the Kopi side of the barbed wire where the strikers were with their weapons?
Umbuzo ukuthi kweli cebo lalibhaliwe phaya kule plan yayenziwe kwakukhona isicwangciso sokuba kuzawubakho inyala ezawusuka apha isiya phaya eKopini.
Correct, Chairperson.
It did, did it?
Yes, Chairperson, as I'm referring to that, the Nyala will be used as a safe house.
No.
Man, Charles,
Plan was in Yana be used to save house. The question is which side of the barbed wire
Yeah.
was it going to be? We have photographs of the barbed wire in position. I couldn't see any space for it in the yard to go through.
Chairperson,
Unless the yard was going to knock the barbed wire over on its way through. But I don't think that was the plan either, was it?
umfanekiso apha kukho umgxalo wocingo ololuhlabayo akukho umfanekiso wenyala ebonisa apho kokuba yayizawugqitha apha isiya phaya kwintunduma kakubaqhankqalazi.
What's the answer to that?
Yes, Chairperson, the Nyala could go on the other side of the barbed wire for those POP members that are supposed to do the dispersal process.
But where was it going to go through?
Ukuthi bezokwazi inyalo kokuba iye phaya kumapolisa ilandele lamapolisa yo-POP ayokwenza usasazo laba bantu. Buza ngokuba ibizawugqitha phi.
Chairperson, probably Brigadier Khalid and those that implemented the plan might be in a position to answer why they couldn't go through.
All right, I'll ask them that question when they come. If they don't ask, I don't know.
Uzakwazi ukuphendula Brigadier Khalid.
Perhaps we can take the tea adjournment at this stage. We've actually run on. We'll take the tea adjournment for 15 minutes.
Ake sithathe ixesha letiye kancinci.
Mission resumes. You're still under oath, Major General. Mr. Bilanga?
General, usephantsi kwesifungo ke uqhubeka umhlekazi uMadlanga.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General, let me take you back to an earlier question that Commissioner Hemraj asked you, and to which there was a follow-up by the chairman. And the question was whether you foresaw that there would be, or there might be, bloodshed. Now, in your response, you referred to individuals and so on and so on. What I would like to get a response which is as brief as possible, General, to that answer. Did you foresee that there might be bloodshed?
Umbuzo ke lo ubuya kugeneral uthi uke ubuza uCommissioner uHemraj lo mbuzo kokuba uke wabanawo na umbono ukuba kungahle kubekho uphalalo legazi pha umbuzo yilowo awuzange uyibone leyo nto kokuba apha kungahle kubekho
even if precipitated by individuals. Let me stick in the individuals because this is what seems to cause confusion.
noma mhlawumbe bekungaba ngabo bantu bathize babangayenza lento masitsho kubo ubuyibona ba inokwenzeka na into njengaleyo.
Correct, Chairperson.
Ewe mhlekazi.
And I even went on to say there were plans to address that risk.
Ithe sithe xa sibona uba kungenzeka into njengaleyo kwasekwenziwa icebo ke lokuba ithintelwe into njengaleyo ukuba ingenzeki.
In that case then, General, what you say in response to Mr. Ngalwana's question cannot possibly be true, and which is that you had mentioned the possibility of bloodshed purely as a strategy. In the light of the last response you've just given, surely that just cannot be the truth. What do you say?
Xa kunjalo ke general intetho wayithetha nomhlekazi uNgelwana kokuba xa uveza lonto wawenzela kokuba aba bamele inkokheli zabasebenzi bathathele ingqalelo lento ungaboni ungenalo wena umbono njengalo kuba khwintezo enjalo ezokwenzeka.
Chairperson, I did differentiate when I was talking to Mr. Zenza Nuzokwana, the context of that, and also to respond to Advocate Ngalwana with regard to why I did not brief the police.
Ndeyenza umahluko mhlekazi kokuba intoni ndayithetha ngolo hlobo kumhlekazi usenzeni Zokwana nokuthi ke xa ndibuza umhlekazi uNgelwana intoni ingaxela ngamapolisa ndanikeza isizathu apha.
General, I suggest to you, and we will argue, that the truth is that you in fact foresaw the possibility of bloodshed, and that it is a lie or an untruth that you in fact did not have such foresight, and that you merely mentioned this at the debriefing session with NUM purely as a strategy.
Into kokuba wawusebenzisa lento njenge-strategy xa uthetha nosenzeni Zokwana wenum ayiyona inyani siza kuyibeka phambi kweCommissioner kokuba wena wawunawo umbono ubona lento yokuba kunokwenzeka ukuba kubekho ungquzulwano apho kuzoba khona uphalalo legazi.
Comment?
Thini kuloo nto?
No, I do not agree, Chairperson, with the reasons mentioned.
Nawe mhlekazi.
Let me take you to paragraph 23 of your supplementary statement, your second type statement, which is what? Which is H3. Paragraph 23.
Siza ngoku statement sakho ingxele yakho yesibini.
Now, for context, General, you will recall that there was the JOCOM meeting of 6 a.m. on the 16th, and there it was decided that SABC would proceed to dispersal action or stage 3 if there was escalation.
Andithi uye wathi apha kwingxelo yasekuseni ngo-6 kwi-jobcom nge-16 zika-August kwavela ingxelo ukuba amapolisa azawuthatha umgangatho wokokuba kuhlukaniswe aba bantu xa ku.
Now, with that background in mind, in paragraph 23, you deal with what appear to be your reasons for motivating for the implementation of stage 3.
Apha ke wathi xa kukho izehlakalo ziya ngokwanda uzawungenela kweli nyathelo lesithathu. Ngoku uyabeka ke apha izizathu ezenza okokuba nize nifikelele kwelo nyathelo.
And in the introductory part of the paragraph, you are indicating that you were briefing General Mbombo on why stage 3 should be implemented.
Uthi apha wawuxelela uGeneral Mbombo okokuba yintoni isizathu sokokuba kunyanzelekile ukuba lingene ngoku kumgangatho lo wesithathu.
You set out what you refer to as some of the reasons why you so motivated, and you do that in 5 bullet points.
Beka ke izizathu apha ezinhlanu ezohlukile okokuba yintoni kudingekile ukuba kungene kweli nyathelo.
The first one you give is this: negotiations by the SABC directly with them since Monday 13 August 2012 had failed.
Uthi apha ke uthethathethano phakathi kwabo ne-SAP kusuka ngomhla ka-13 ku-August kuze kuba ngoku ayibanga namphumela ifanele.
Now, do you agree, General, that at the time that in the morning at 6 a.m., when it was decided that stage 3 would be proceeded to if there was escalation, SABC was already aware that the protesters were not cooperative on the question of disarming? Is that not so?
Lana nami xa kuthathwa esigqibo kusasa ngo-6 ngomhla ka-16 amapolisa besenolwazi lokokuba abafumani umsebenziswano naba bantu ngokubekwa phansi kwezixhobo.
Chairperson, I need to say, firstly, maybe I need to explain, because the meeting that the advocate is referring to is 6 o'clock. My motivation is for 13:30. So I wanted maybe advocate should clarify to me whether should I proceed, because I see them as 2 different documentations. And if the meeting of 6 o'clock in the morning, maybe we can go to the document. There is also an indication of stage 3, but my motivation here, advocate, Chairperson, it was for 13:30 when I briefed the Provincial Commissioner before the meeting.
Ezinto ndithetha ngazo apha ke commissioner izinto zazenzeka ngo1:30 emini, kodwa inhlangano le umhlangano le yayibanjwe kusasa ngo6. Ngoku ke izinto ezimbili ezohlukile phakathi kwalo nhlangano nezigqibo ezazizawuthatha ngo1:30.
I will explain myself, General. The relevance of 6 a.m. on the day is that at 6 a.m. it is said that we proceed to stage 3 if there is an escalation.
Andithi kunjalo General ukuthi ngo6 kusasa kwathiwa sizawuqhubeka ngonyathelo lesithathu xa kukho ukwanda kwezehlakalo ezi.
At 13:30, or for purposes of a decision that was to be taken at 13:30, you are motivating for the implementation of stage 3 Now, what I am about, let me be open with you, what I am about now is to try to understand what escalation there had been from 6 a.m. to 13:30. That is the exercise I am about. I'm not saying there wasn't, but all I'm trying to understand is what escalation, if any, there had been from 6 a.m. to 13:30.
into endiyibuzayo yileyo kuba esigqibo senziwa ngo-6 ukuthi kuzawuthathwa kuzawungena emgangathweni wesithathu xa kukho ukwanda kwezehlakalo ezi. Ngoku mbuzo ukuba yintoni ukwanda okwabakhona okwabangela okokuba kuthathwe eso sigqibo ngelo xesha.
Do you now understand the relevance of 6 a.m. in the context of 13:30?
Uyandivisisa kuba yintoni ndithetha ngale ixesha lakusasa ngo-6?
Correct, Chairperson.
Ewe mhlekazi.
Chairperson, I'm just requesting the advocate, maybe we go to the same minutes of 6 o'clock,
Cela okokuba siye phaya kwimizuzu kwi-minutes zika-6.
which I will
That
request.
is, commissioners, that's TT4.
Ezi minutes athetha ngazo exhibit TT4.
Whilst you are looking for your copy, General, may I in the meantime just read to you what appears at 2.3 of TT4 under the heading Input on Daily Deployment.
Mandikufundele ke apha ukuba kuthiwani phaya ku-TT4 apho kuthiwa ke kwandiswa kwabantu bazawubekwa ngoluphi uhlobo mini nemini.
Close to the foot of the page, the following appears. This is just to focus your mind on the escalation that I referred to. If the situation escalates, it's close to the foot of the page. If the situation escalates, stage 3 will be implemented, but proper communication will be done with all commanders when that decision is taken.
Kuthiwa apha ke kuthiwa xa izenzo izehlakalo ziba zichubeka ngokuba ndlobongela.
Now you may take
nyathelo kodwa ke ikomanda zonke ziyawuxelela.
Now you may take the commission to where you wanted to take it to.
Awusithathe ke usibeke apho ufuna ubusisa khona, General.
Chairperson, I'm requesting the commission, we should go to the next page of the same TT4.
Masiye kwikhasi elilandelayo kwi-TT4.
The last paragraph with the sentence which starts with if. If the negotiations are not successful and the protesters refuse to leave the copy and lay down their weapons, the police must be in a position to act accordingly.
Kuthiwa ke apho xa kusenzeka okokuba uthethathethwano alubi nempumelelo nabaqhankqalazi bangavumi okokuba babeke phansi izixhobo zabo, amapolisa kufanele athathe izinyathelo ke ezifanelekile.
Meaning what, General?
Chaza ntoni ke loo nto, General?
Are you reading that to suggest that stage 3 could well have been proceeded to even if there had not been any escalation? Is that what you are reading that to demonstrate?
Uyifunda ngayo ayikhombisi apho kokuba kwakuzojonga okokuba kukhona ubuya ngokucatsela ubundlobongela obukhona apho yayizawuthathwa lo mgangatho noma kungekho.
Chairperson, I'll request the advocate to ask the original question because this is precisely in response to the question that the advocate asked me.
Cela okokuba advocate abuze lo mbuzo njengoba ubuzile ngoba lento ayibuzayo yilento agqiba ukuyibuza ngoku.
All right, General, let me take you to what led to that question. It's the first bullet under paragraph 23, and it reads, negotiations by the SABC directly with them since Monday, 13 August 2012 had failed. Now, what I put to you or suggested to you was that that had been the situation throughout. The protesters had not cooperated when the police were doing all they could to try to disarm them. They had Lieutenant Colonel McIntosh and them tried, negotiated, and there was no cooperation at all from the police. So as at 6 o'clock, when the police are saying, if there is an escalation, we proceed to stage 3, that is a fact that they are already aware of, that the protesters are not cooperating, the protesters just will not disarm. Do you agree that that was so? That was a fact that the police were already aware of throughout.
Uyakuvuma kokuba amapolisa besenalo kulwazi ngexesha lika-6 kusasa kokuba lento isiyenzekile lena okokuba oGeneral McIntosh nabanye bazami benze zonke inzame zoba kubekho uthethathethwano ongazange lube nempumelelo sebeyazi ngelo xesha lakusasa.
Chairperson, my reference here, it was also in line with the crowd management policy standing order 262.
Impendulo yami apha ke ihambelana nemigaqo njengoba ibekiwe phaya kwi-standing order 262.
That the reason was not only the escalation, but that the negotiation, as is stated by the standing order.
Njengoba singasho kanjalo i-standing order.
General, because I'm trying to understand in my own mind what escalation had taken place as at 13:30 on the 16th. My question is a simple one, and it is this. Is it not so that the failure by the strikers to cooperate on the question of disarming, that was a fact that was known to the police throughout, as at 6 a.m. when the police said, we will proceed to stage 3 if there is escalation? Is it not so that this was a fact that was known to the police as at 6 a.m.? Simple question.
Isigqibo esasithethe general okokuba kuzawungena kumlo mgangatho wesithathu xa kukho izehlakalo ezibonisa okokuba iya ngokwanda lento, kodwa kumbuzo okokuba lento yokokuba uthethathethwano lalingaphumelelanga yinto ibisaziwa ngamapolisa.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I think the previous night there was a meeting with Matunjwa during the debriefing with the members of the police, where there was an indication that, Mr. Matunjwa indicated that tomorrow morning will be all happy.
That is ambiguous.
That is suggesting an answer to the witness.
Yeah, but apart from that, it's a bad answer, because Matunjwa seemed confident that the problem could be solved the next morning, but he was going to go and speak to them at 9 o'clock. In fact, only went to speak to them at 12 o'clock for reasons we don't go into. He was urged by the provincial commissioner to go and speak to them. So before he even had come back, while he was still talking to the people, trying to persuade them to lay down their arms, the decision was taken at 1:30 if it was not taken before. So apart from the fact of suggesting an answer, it's a bad answer. So shall we carry on with the case?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm sure you are endeavouring to be of assistance, but I'm afraid I think this particular occasion you're not, but next time perhaps you will be. So let's carry on.
Well, the question was that the general or the members of the police knew about that, knew at 6 in the morning.
Yes.
What they knew was, you and I are now debating something that Mr. Malanga should be debating with the witness. What they knew at 6 was that Mr. Matunjwa had indicated that he thought that he could persuade them to lay down their arms. He was going back to see them at 9 o'clock. And that's what they knew. In fact, he didn't go back at 9 for reasons we don't have to go into. He went back after 12 And in fact, he was still with them when the decision was taken at the meeting if it had not been taken before. So, with respect, it doesn't help us. But I don't want to be discourteous. I'm sure next time he will help us. But anyway, carry on, Mr. Fiddler.
Masijonga indaba katata uMathunjwa wayenze isithembiso sokuba uzawubakho uxolo ngemini elandelayo kodwa ke wayeyothetha nabo ngo9 ngezizathu ezithize ke azange aye phaya ngo9 wade waya ngo12 xa esiya phaya kopast 12 isigqibo sasesithethwe.
General, just to avoid possible confusion of issues, point is, regardless of what possible outcome might have come of Mr. Mathunjwa's attempts at disarming the protesters, point is, as at that point, what the police knew was that the protesters would not arm. That is what they knew as at 6 a.m.
Not disarm.
It would not disarm. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Enkosi uthi ke umhlekazi into ebeyaziwa ngamapolisa okokuba noma izinzame ezini zazenziwa uMathunjwa into babeyazi ke okokuba ngoxesha lika 6 kusasa.
I think that question is entirely correct. The fact is, the intelligence report which came before the meeting at 6 o'clock indicated that they wouldn't disarm, but those at the meeting kept the options open, as it were, and did consider the possibility that they might disarm. So I think that question requires some formulation.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I lost a reference to negotiations, which is what the bullet actually says. Thank you, quite correct, Mr. Chairman. But the point I'm making, General, is that regardless of what possible outcome there might have been on attempts by Mr. Mathunjwa to disarm the protesters, as at 6 a.m., negotiations by SABC directly, that is what the first bullet says, negotiations by the SABC directly with them since Monday, 13 August had failed. That the police already knew as at the meeting of 6 a.m. Is that not so? It's a very simple question.
Kunjalo andithi mhlekazi ulula lo mbuzo kokuba ngo6 kusasa amapolisa besazi kokuba ezabo ingqoko intethathethwano phakathi kwamapolisa nabaqhankqalazi bese ziphanzile.
Chairperson, as I said, I refer to Commission to SS2, paragraph 11.
Ndithe xa iCommission ingajonga SS2 sivakalisi 11
Standing order, Chairperson.
Standing order.
Thank you.
But General, the factual position is that as at 6 o'clock that morning, none of the negotiations were successful in getting the strikers to disarm. That's correct, isn't it? That's the factual position.
andithi inyaniso lo ukuba exesha lika 6 ekseni kwase kwaziwa okokuba le ntetho yokokuba babeke phansi izixhobo uthetha phakathi kothethano lokhona phakathi kwamapolisa nabaqhankqalazi lali ngabanga namphumela laliphansi.
Correct, Chairperson, but the standing order also adds that when life and property, particularly life, is in danger. And this is what I wanted to bring up for.
Bendifuna nje ukongeza okokuba i-standing order sithi noma kunjalo apho kukhona intetho ephathelene nobomi babantu nempahla.
Now, if that was what SABC understood in the morning at 6 a.m. when they say we proceed to stage 3 if there is escalation, this fact that was already known to SABC when they took that decision, we proceed to stage 3 if there's escalation, it could not possibly have been an escalation. It could not possibly or sensibly have been considered to be an escalation. Could it?
Kwase kwenziwe esigqibo sokuba kuzawuthathwa kungene kumgangatho wesithathu kwakungangenwa kulo mgangatho wesithathu ngesizathu sokuba kukho ukwanda kobundlobongela andithi kunjalo.
Chairperson, what I'm trying to say is not the escalation alone that has to be taken into account. And hence I refer the Commission to the same TT4 to the following page to indicate that SABC will go to stage 3 in terms of Standing Order 262. That's a paragraph that I'm referring to. And secondly, maybe Advocate Chairperson would be clarified here. Escalation of violence, how is being interpreted in this case? Maybe then we'll also have to indicate on the basis of the escalation of violence.
Asithetha apha ngokwanda kwezehlakalo zodushe ezinobundlobongela fanele kucaciswe leyo nto apha ndithetha khona ngokuba kwakuyothatha umgangatho wesithathu kwakwenziwa okungokuhambelana nomthetho obekwe si-Standing Order u-T62.
General, I was not at the meeting of 6 a.m. on the 16th, nor did I come up with the concept of escalation, and I'm happy that you refer to, or rather you make plain that the escalation was in fact escalation of violence. So I was not there. This is not my concept. It's SAB's own concept, and it's SAB's own decision to proceed to stage 3 if there is escalation, and as I understand you, escalation of violence. So I will not give the explanation that you are asking for. Now,
Iva kakuhleke incazelo kokuba xa uthetha ngokwanda apha uthetha ngokwanda kwezehlo zodushe.
Chairperson.
Are you getting off escalation now? You're getting off the escalator. Can I put a question?
Please.
Dealing through the escalation.
Andibuze lo
I
mbuzo.
didn't understand an answer you gave a few minutes ago. You talked about escalation, that you talked about something else. Now, what I want to know from you is this. According to the minutes, it appears that the decision taken was that stage 3 would be implemented if the situation escalates. That's what it says on page 1. So unless there's a change of intention by the time we get to page 2, we can accept that what the meeting at 6 o'clock decided was that stage 3 would be implemented if there was escalation. Now, are you telling, now there are two possibilities. Either it was decided to implement stage 3 because there was escalation, and what Mr. Madlanga is investigating is whether there truly was escalation. Alternatively, there was a change of intention, and it was decided even though there isn't escalation, it's true we decided at 6 o'clock that we will implement stage 3 if there is escalation. There isn't escalation, well, never mind, we still implement it. So there are two possibilities, either stage 3 because of escalation, or stage 3 even though there isn't escalation. You understand the difference?
Uyawubona umahluko apha general njengoba ndisisho ngoba esigqibo sasesithethe ngo-6 kusasa kwakuthiwa ke sizawuthathwa uzawungenwa kolunyathelo xa kukho ukwanda kwezi zidubedube kodwa ke kwabakho ushintsho apho kuba liyawuthathwa noma kukhona ukungandi kwezehlakalo. Uyayiva ubona umahluko.
Correct, Chairperson, but what I wanted to...
Ewe ndiyayiva apho mntakazi.
Which was it? Was stage 3, was the decision taken to implement stage 3? Was the decision taken to implement stage 3 because there was escalation, or was the decision taken to implement stage 3 even though there wasn't escalation? Which of the two was it?
Ngoku ke eyiphi kwezigqibo ezimbini ndangena kulo mgangatho lona wesithathu ngoba kukho ukwanda kwezehlakalo ikanene yathathwa noma zingekho.
Chairperson, in my understanding, stage 3 was implemented, as I indicated to you, to the next page.
Gone through that. The next page is part of the minutes of the JOCO meeting at 6 o'clock.
Correct,
And on
Chairperson.
page 1, it says that if there's escalation, stage 3 will be implemented. Now, unless those at the meeting change their minds between what was recorded at the foot of page 1 and what's recorded in page 2, then the result of the deliberations at 6 o'clock at the JOCO meeting was there will be an implementation of stage 3 with escalation. But anyway, that must be so, surely. Unless, it's not suggested anywhere in the minutes, is it, that those at the meeting changed their mind between the foot of page 1 and the foot of page 2. Isn't that right?
Kunjalo kokuba lento ibhale phaya kwipage yokuqala
And in fact-
ayikhombo kokuba kwaba khona ukuguqula komqondo apho.
In fact, the passage that you referred to on page 2 doesn't say that there will be a stage 3 implementation if there isn't escalation. What it says is something different.
Thetha into ehlukile.
it says, if the negotiation is not successful and the protesters refuse to leave the copy, lay down their weapons, the police must be in a position to act accordingly. Not that stage 3 will be implemented. They will have to be in a position to act accordingly. And in fact, the very next sentence says there will be again talk to the unions at 9 o'clock, and the outcome thereof will have an influence on the decision taken. But all commanders will be informed accordingly. So it's not possible, I would think, subject to what you're going to tell me, to read the sentence starting if the negotiations are not successful as meaning that stage 3 was going to be implemented even if there wasn't escalation. I would have thought the next sentence makes it clear that no decision had been taken because the outcome of the talk to the union will have an influence on the decision taken. So it looks to me, I mean, again, this is just a prima facie view, you can help me if I'm wrong, but it looks to me as if at the end of the 6 o'clock meeting, one could be clear that the decision was if there's escalation, stage 3 will be implemented. So that's why I asked you the question. What happened eventually when it was decided to proceed with the implementation of stage 3 at the 1:30 meeting? Was that because there was escalation, or was it decided because there was, despite the fact that there wasn't escalation, you were still going ahead with stage 3? One or the other. Now, you were at the 1:30 meeting, weren't you?
Umbuzo umhlekazi okokuba kwathathwa umgangatho lo wesithathu ngasiphi isizathu yathathwa ngokuba kukhona ukwanda kobundlobongela apho njengoba kushiwo noma kwathathwa ngoba kwasekwenziwe isigqibo phaya kwakusasa ngo6.
According to your supplementary statement, but not your original statement, you were the one who made the decision to implement stage 3 before the 1:30 meeting. I understand you sometime around 12 o'clock, and you then briefed the provincial commission accordingly. Now, if that's correct, and the decision was really yours, was the decision to implement was the decision to implement stage 3 because there'd been escalation, or was the decision to implement stage 3 even though there hadn't been escalation? Which of the two was it?
Sifunda apha kushiwa esigqibo senziwa nguwe mhlekazi sathathwa nguwe sesisikawa. Ngoku ke sibuzo kokuba senziwa eso sigqibo usenza nje phezu kokuba kwakugqitywe phaya ngo6 okokuba siyakwenziwa noma senziwa ngoba kwakho ukwanda kwezehlo ezobundlobongela.
Chairperson, to explain what Chairperson is saying, to act accordingly, in my interpretation, it was that we comply with Standing Order 262.
Next sentence says that there would be talks with the unions at 9 o'clock, and the result of those, the outcome of those talks would then determine the decision to be taken. So quite clearly, there was no separate decision according to the foot of page 2 at that stage. But anyway, but that's a sideshow. Let's concentrate on the main point. The main point is the decision to implement stage 3, which you say you took, according to your supplementary statement, which you conveyed to the provincial commissioner, was that decision a decision to implement stage 3 because there had been escalation, or even though there hadn't been escalation? Which of the two was it?
Umbuzo ilokuba nguwothi wenza esigqibo general wade waxelela no provincial commission masigqibo samsesi. Umbuzo ngokuthi wasithatha esigqibo uthatha phezu kwento yokuba kwenziwe esigqibo ekseni noma wasithatha ngoba kubonakala okokuba ziya ngokwanda izehlakalo.
Chairperson, according to my supplementary statement, is the negotiations and the fear that what has happened since Sunday, it is going to happen, and that since the mood of the protesters coming to the issue of now that negotiations are not continuing, referring to the assistance that we could have get from Mr. Matunjwa, couldn't possibly have resulted in protesters handing handing weapons voluntarily. This is actually what paragraph 23 is addressing.
I'm afraid you still don't understand your answer because you haven't answered the question directly. So I shall ask it again. The question I ask you is this. The decision that you say you took to implement stage 3, which was taken before the 1:30 meeting, was that decision taken because there had been an escalation, or was it taken even though there hadn't been an escalation? That's the question. What's the answer?
Esisigqibo esokuba kuyawuthathwa kungene apha kumgangatho lo wesithathu senziwa nguwe njengoba kushiwo apho wasenza ke phezulu kokuthi kwakuya ngokwanda ukubakho wezahlakalo ezizodushe noma senzeka ngaphandle kokuthi noma lukhona noma kalukho.
Chairperson, it is in terms of of paragraph 23. According to paragraph 23, no escalation. But what?
Fine. So your answer is I understand the answer. The answer is the decision to implement stage 3, which you say you took, and conveyed to the provincial commissioner, was taken not because of escalation, but the fact even though there wasn't escalation. Is that right?
Kunjalo kokuba wasithatha esisigqibo xa uzawucela uCommissioner wephondo ngaphandle kokuthi kubekho ukwanda kwezehlakalo.
One of the points is, you remember, Mr. Matunjwa was supposed to speak to the people at 9 o'clock. And for various reasons we don't have to get into now, he only got around to seeing them after 12. In fact, the provincial commissioner urged him to go and speak to the people on the Kopi, berated him for not having kept his promise to speak to them, and she urged him to go and persuade the people to lay down their arms. So eventually he went, and before he came back, and before you received a report as to whether he'd been successful, the 1:30 meeting was taken. But it's even more complicated than that, because according to you, you decided that stage 3 should be implemented earlier than that, around about 12 o'clock or 12:15 or something like that. I think it was even before Mr. Matunjwa had gone, or possibly while he was on the way. Now, the evidence unchallenged is the provincial commissioner berated him for not going to the Mkopi, said he promised to go, he had an obligation to go to persuade the people to lay down their arms. Eventually he went and did that, went to try. Before he reported back, before it was known whether he was successful, and there was a long impassioned speech he made, you remember, and he got on his knees and so forth. Before any of that was, the results of any of that was known, you say that you decided that stage 3 should be implemented. Now, how does one explain that?
Uchilona angayiva kakuhle umgcini sihlalo kokuba kwade kwadingeka kuba uprovincial commissioner kube uye othetha noMathunja ephakamsizo kokuba Mathunja ufanele kokuba uthetha nabantu bakhe njengoba besenze isithembiso wahamba kuMathunja kodwa into esixhaya kokuba engabuyo uMathunja nempendulo esephaya noma eseyendleleni wena wasowusithethe isigqibo sokuba kuyawungenwa kwelinyathelo lesithathu.
Chairperson, I said that I briefed the provincial commissioner before 13:30 meeting, whereby the meeting is still going to take place. Yes. And by that time, Mr. Mathunja was also on the way of addressing the protesters.
Ndathetha no-provincial commissioner phambi kokuba kubethe elo xesha uMathunja sehambile eyephaya kubantu bakhe uyothetha nabo.
The difficulty of that answer is your second bullet point in paragraph 23. Would you like to read it to us?
Ingxaki nayo ke kuba sivakalise sibini kwintetho yakho. Uthi makasifundele yona ugeneral.
Chairperson, he says that negotiations with them through the presidents of the two trade unions, AMCO and NUM, had failed.
Until Mr. Mathunja came back and said, I negotiated with them as I was obliged to do, as the provincial commissioner urged me to do. But unfortunately, I failed, and they won't listen. Until that happened, was that statement true?
Yayinyanzo lento kokuba wayiveza lento kuba uzamile ukuthetha nabo kodwa ke bangamamela aba bantu.
Chairperson, what I was saying here is that I expected that when Mr. Mathunja addressed them, they will listen to him.
ndithi mna ndandethemba okokuba uMathunjwa xa ethetha nabo bamamele ukuba uthini.
And
Perfect. You said had failed. Now, how can one say that negotiations had failed if Mr. Matunja was still busy with his negotiations? He was, at the time the statement was made, he was on his way to resume the negotiations with the strikers on the Kopi.
Into endingayiva kahle kule ntetho yakho ke General okokuba
I don't understand the argument. Forgive me if I'm putting it strongly to you, but you understand I have to keep an open mind, and I'm trying my best to do so. But it's difficult in the face of statements which I don't understand how they can be correct. But if I'm misunderstanding, if there's something that I'm not appreciating, then now's your chance to put me on the right track.
uthi umgcinisihlalo khawundincede apha ngoba kho apho ndingayiva kakuhle intetho yakho ngoba uthetha apho kokuba yomibini imibutho yazama ukuthetha naba bantu yangaba impumelelo intetho yabo kodwa ngelo xesha uMathunjwa besahambile le ayothetha nabantu bakubungayithetha kanjani into enjengaleyo.
Chairperson, in my indication is that of the mood. And the mood does include when Mr. Mathunjwa was there. But surely, if there could have been any other change.
Sorry, I don't understand that either. He hadn't been there yet that day. Did he?
Bengafika apho uMathunjwa ngelo xesha. Alo mini.
He went twice, remember, but he went once after 12, and then he went again after that, about 3:30.
Waya phaya ko-12 waphinde waya phaya ko-3.
Before he went the first time, there was no question of their mood in responding to him, because he hadn't been there yet. So I don't understand how the reference to the mood, the top of the next page, helps us in relation to the statement, which appears to be incorrect, anyway, difficult to understand. At the foot of page 9 of your statement, the second bullet in paragraph 23.
Chairperson will recall Colonel McIntosh, what he said about the protesters. And also when Mr. Mathunjwa went and knelt and pleaded with them.
That was after you made the statement to the Provincial Commissioner, you see. We're concerned with the statement you claim you made to the Provincial Commissioner in your supplementary statement, not your main statement. We're concerned whether, A, you did make the statement, and if you made it, whether what you said was correct. Now, I don't see how you could have talked about negotiation having failed if Mathunjwa wasn't finished with negotiations. I don't see how you can talk about their mood when Mathunjwa spoke to them if he hadn't spoken to them yet. So I can understand what you say about Lieutenant Colonel McIntosh statement about their mood before that. I understand that answer. And I'm not criticizing you for that answer at all. I think it appears to be perfectly understandable and correct. But we're busy really with the second bullet, the foot of page 9, you see. And I'm just putting it to you that prima facie, as I see it at the moment, it doesn't appear to be correct. But if I'm misunderstanding it or not appreciating something, then you must please help me.
uthi umgcinisihlalo mncede apha mhlawumbe ndime ndingayiva kakuhle le ntetho yakho ndiyayiva le ntetho kamhlekazi uMcIntosh xa ethi ukuziphatha kwaba bantu kwakunjani kodwa ke apha uthetha khona okokuba uthethathethwano abo lalungabanga impumelelo uMathunjwa engekagqibi engakabuyi nakubuyi.
Chairperson, that's bullet is in relation to say that while we were also going to have the meeting, at that time, this was the position. But if there could have been any changes on the ground, Chairperson, since we were still going to the meeting, maybe then the bullet could not have been like this. But probably, if there could have been any other change to the statement, then surely the weapons could have been handed. But at the time when I was briefing the Provincial Commissioner, after Mr. Mathunjwa came, we didn't hear what he's saying. There was no indication to say that he is succeeding. But I do take into account that he was still going again back to the protesters. And there was still time, Chairperson, that if Mr. Mathunjwa could have convinced the protesters the situation could have changed.
The difficulty with that answer is, well, the first difficulty, it hasn't been interpreted yet.
uthi umhlekazi uyayiva lento ethethethwayo kodwa ke uthi uyibeke ngoluhlobo apha lento ngoba imeko yayimi ngoluhlobo ngelixesha kodwa ke babemile bese nethemba lokuba uMathunja xa engabuya phaya nentetho ethize kwangahle kube khona mhlawumbe uguqulo oluthize lalungahle lube khona.
The difficulty with that answer is, as far as I can remember, I haven't got the transcript of what you said last time before me, but as far as I can remember, your evidence was that you made the decision, the Provincial Commissioner didn't. You made the decision, you then put it to her about 12 o'clock, and she approved it. And it was then decided to call the meeting at 1:30. I may have recollected that incorrectly, but Mr. Madlanga nods his head, so he understands it the same way as I did. Now, if that's so, then what you told us when you gave evidence last time was that you made the decision, and you made the decision at 12 o'clock, and you gave your reasons. Well, I'm just examining the reasons with you to see whether they could have been your reasons, because it seemed to me that one of them at least didn't exist yet. But those are my difficulties, you see, you understand?
Nayo ileyo ke mhlekazo kokuba xa wenza esisigqibo ubaxelela ngo12 ukuba isigqibo sakho siyintoni kwezi zizathu ozinikelana esinye sazo asikwazi ukuba inyani ngoba bekuyinto ebingekenzeki ngelo xesha.
I understand the difficulty the chairperson is having
Need to resolve it.
Ndiyabona ingxaki onayo mhlekazi uthi kumgcini sihlalo khawundincedeke apho.
if we could go to where I said I made a decision. I said I made a decision to go to the provincial commissioner, and that decision is the one that briefed, and I think the Judge Hamrich also asked me many questions, and to say, it's you who made a decision to go to stage 3. Then I said, I briefed the provincial commissioner. The decision that the chairperson should understand is that is the one that I made to go to the provincial commissioner to say the situation has come to this, and my fear is this one. Taking into account that we are still going to have a meeting, and if there could be any other changes or any member in the meeting opposing what I have already briefed the provincial commissioner about, the situation could have changed.
Uthi xa ethetha nangexesha ebuzwa nguCommissioner uHemraj okokuba isigqibo asithatha, uthi uGeneral wayethethe isigqibo sokuba uzawuya kuxelela uProvincial Commissioner ukuba kubenzeka ntoni, bese ke kuthi ke xa kukho mhlawumbe inguquko ezithize noma abangahambisani nalo mbono wakhe phaya kwi-meeting yayiyawuba nje 1:30 kusetyenzwa ngolo hlobo.
Sorry, I see it's in my endeavor to understand your answer, we've gone over the time I intended to adjourn, so we've been working overtime to some extent. So we'll adjourn now until, if that's convenient for you, Mr. Madlanga.
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
And we resume at 9 o'clock. Please note, 9 o'clock tomorrow. From now on, I want us to start at 9 o'clock if we can in the mornings. Half an hour lunch hour.
Kusuka ngoku commission izawuvula saqala ngo9 o'clock kusasa.
The time that we sit, and we will not be sitting, as I think it's been indicated on Wednesday, as Mr. Mpofu mentioned. We don't sit here because the premises aren't available on the first Monday and the first and third Wednesdays of the month, and this will be the third Wednesday.
Indawo sikuyo ke kuyobe kukho okunye okwenziwayo kuyo ngolesithathu ngakuyobe ingavulekanga sobe singahlalanga ngolesithathu apha.
We will have a meeting at the Momentum Buildings in Pretoria of the commissioners and the parties and their representatives to discuss ways of expediting the proceedings. And also we hope to have a meeting between the Human Rights Commission and the police. I understand from the Senior Counsel for the Police that they will be available. So we'll start the police human rights meeting at 9:45, and if it's finished within a quarter of an hour, that's imposing a time limit, which I will do flexibly if I have to extend it. And thereafter, at 10 o'clock or soon thereafter, as we can start, we'll have the plenary meeting, as it were, discussing ways of hopefully expediting the proceedings. So we will now adjourn until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Sibe apha ngo9 ngomso.